This series is all about universes, multiverses, planets, worlds, continents and cities. We're delving not into specific games, but into the milieux created for them. We'll be looking at where these settings came from, their major features, and why you should consider them for your own gaming experiences. One of the most celebrated fantasy series of my youth was that of the Riftwar saga by Raymond Feist. Virtually everyone that was into fantasy at the time that I knew read the book Magician. That described the rise of an apprentice wizard, Pug, through the course of a war between worlds. But did you know that both of the worlds associated with the Riftwar saga, Midkemia and Milieu, began life as role-playing settings? Today on View Over the Milieu, we're going to explore that. As often happens in classic role-playing gaming origin stories, our tale begins in 1975 with the original edition of Dungeons & Dragons. Here we start with a wargaming group in San Diego, the Triton Wargaming Club. Proponents of the club at this time were Steve Abrams, John Everson and Conan Lamott. It was the latter that, from a trip to LA, brought back a new game for the group to try out, one Dungeons & Dragons. Ultimately, the group became dissatisfied with the rules, enjoying the concept but not the thematic concepts of the game, and the core play style it encouraged. Using their own knowledge and experience with respect to medieval warfare and history, coupled with their own taste in fantasy, this trio built their own rules, a set to describe their own campaign world of Midkemia. The group playing this game within this world grew, and included in their new members coming on board was one Raymond Feist. Together, they formed a small role-playing game company, Midkemia Press, originally Abrams and Everson, but then changing to the more evocative aforementioned name once Lamott's permission to use it had been received, through which they were to publish several supplements, and had the intention to publish their own RPG rules, as the Tome of Midkemia, which, to this day, is still stated as an intention on Midkemia Press's website, and though the company is more or less just a rights-holding outfit these days for material copyright. The campaigns set in Midkemia progressed, with the original group, known as the Thursday Gamers, evolving into the Friday Gamers, as the group's size and schedules changed. One of the plot elements introduced in Abrams and Everson's campaign was the invasion of Midkemia by forces from another world, in this case, one Tecamel, a world created and detailed by M.A.R. Barker, which has been self-published originally in 1974 and subsequently picked up by TSR. Of course, in a home campaign, all sorts of cross-threading are possible in this way. My own world setting has seen visitors from Greyhawk, Glorantha and Nawan over the years. It is obviously something to be avoided when it comes to product releases, without, of course, proper permission, licenses and credits. But we'll come back to that. From 1977, Feist took the happenings within the Midkemia games and wrote them up in prose form, shaping them into novel format, with encouragement and support from his fellow Midkemia gamers. The manuscript of the first novel in this form was completed in 1979. Here, I believe the folks at Midkemia Press and Feist made probably one of the most sensible decisions that I've ever seen, especially when compared to the mess that is the comics and movie rights to Conan and Red Sonja characters, from the same world originating with the same author yet controlled by very different rights holders, that have had all sorts of ups and downs in their willingness to share. The Midkemia set, as Feist sought publication for his novel, decided to separate the role-playing game publishing pursuits of Midkemia Press from the fledgling novel writing of Feist, with an amicable agreement to share the world. And so it was that in 1982 the first novel of the Riftwar saga, Magician, was published, with great success. That Midkemia Press didn't work off that success and enter into some mutual agreement to publish Midkemia as a setting has always mystified me, but they didn't. Instead, they had focus on generic or semi-generic supplements. Their first was one of my most well-used and well-loved RPG books, Cities by Abrams and Everson, that came out in 1979. From there, Midkemia Press specialised in urban environments, with supplements focused on cities within the Midkemia role-playing setting, the city of Kars in 1980, Tulan of the Isles and Towns of the Outlands in 1981, and Jonril, Gateway to the Sunken Lands in 1982, and Heart of the Sunken Lands in 1983. Rounding out this was an adventure, The Black Tower, published in 1981, and a couple of articles in the magazine Sorcerer's Apprentice describing the village of Hoxley in 1983. And that pretty much covers all of Midkemia Press's output, other than the press crew being a major contributor to Chaosium's Thieves' World campaign setting in 1981. The relationship with Chaosium formed re-releases with improved presentation of Cities and Kars in 1986 and Tulan in 1987. With Avalon Hill coming on board with Chaosium to produce the third edition of RuneQuest, Cities received new life as RuneQuest Cities in 1988. With the eventual demise of the Chaosium Avalon Hill arrangement, and with Chaosium unable to produce materials for RuneQuest for some time after that, the license to Midkemia materials also came to an end, and no further Midkemia Press publications have been seen since. The old, in many cases revised, versions of those publications, including a fourth edition of The Wonderful Cities, are still available, some on DriveThruRPG, and all on Midkemia Press's own website. Relevant links in the description. Meanwhile, Feist's novelised version of Midkemia has gone from strength to strength, resulting in 30 volumes from 1982 to 2013. 31 if you include the split of Magician into Magician Apprentice and Magician Master in the mid-1980s. The books are wonderful reads, although in some cases the fact that they are founded upon role-playing gaming does show through, and some elements of Feist's Midkemia do seem to be derivative. For me, for example, Stardock as a mountain in Naywon, not an island habitation for a wizard. There is one glaring facet of derivation woven throughout the series, though, and to examine that we must return to Tecumil and that campaign of interplanetary invasion. You see, much of the Riftwar, as played out in Abrams and Everson's game, was about the invasion of Midkemia by Tecumil, not Kellerwan, as named in the Riftwar saga novels by Feist. Feist does acknowledge this, but also states that he was unaware of the connection being made in-game at the time. I'm inclined to believe this, as while Kellerwan does have some shared traits with Tecumil, it is obviously not a direct lift. So while Kellerwan may have, in gaming terms, been Tecumil, or based thereon, the Kellerwan of the Riftwar saga novels is not Tecumil, but the Feist interpretation of what was going on at the Midkemia game. Anyway, regardless of gaming origin, Kellerwan is not Tecumil, and vice versa. The entire Riftwar cycle is broken up into 10 sets comprising 2 to 4 novels, starting with Magician, the first volume of the Riftwar saga, through to Magician's End, the last volume of the Chaos War saga. Some of the novels deal with the continued adventures of Pug and his friend Thomas from the initial stories, the rest covering other aspects of Midkemia and, as in the case of the Empire trilogy, Kellerwan. Magician remains my favourite of the series, perhaps because of or in spite of the echoes of gameplay that permeate its pages. It is well worth a read, and, conveniently, being the first of the whole shebang, if you like it, you've not started out your Midkemia experience in the middle of the epic. One thing should be noted at this point is that the two versions of Midkemia are not wholly isolated from each other. Abrams and Feist have had a working dialogue, which has resulted in updates to the Midkemia press books reflecting materials from Feist's novels. These updates are mainly in background terms. The Riftwar cycle, according to the timeline presented in Midkemia press books, sits over a millennium in the past, meaning that these gaming works are set far into the future of the world as represented within Feist's novels. As a minor sidetrack, 2 computer role-playing games were released by Sierra that are built on Feist's Midkemia. The first, Betrayal at Krondor, was broadly well received, the negative reviews it garnered seemingly being a matter of taste, and the game actually won several accolades and awards. It was released in 1993, and it has the feel of playing through a novel. The game's plot was worked into a Riftwar cycle novel, Krondor, The Betrayal, in 1998. It was released on GOG.com in 2010 and can still be found on that platform. The second game, Return to Krondor, was released in 1998 as a sequel after a troubled and delayed development period, but still achieved positive reviews, even though it appeared dated alongside contemporary games such as Baldur's Gate. This game was novelised as Krondor Tear of the Gods in 2000, and, like its predecessor, is available from GOG.com. An absolute essential for running a Midkemia campaign based on Feist's works is the 2013 Midkemia, The Chronicles of Pug, a combined narrative and atlas that covers the Riftwar cycle. At a pinch, the maps and gazetteer that can be found online at elvandor.cryd.com provide some details an enterprising DM can tap into. Alongside all of that, the Midkemia press books, largely focusing on urban environments, are absolute essentials. The one thing to watch is that there are some discrepancies between Midkemia, press Midkemia, and Feist Riftwar novels Midkemia, as we've mentioned before. But in no way is this insurmountable. Midkemia is, more or less, a blank slate with pockets of fine detail. Within the Midkemia press books, a small handful of its settlements are mapped and described in some detail, while the Chronicles of Pug details those areas touched by Feist's writing within the Riftwar cycle. Beyond this, very little detail is to be had, which may or may not be a bad thing according to what a gamer wants from the setting. Some prefer a lot of detail, some prefer greater room in which to exercise their own creativity. Midkemia is more suited to the latter. The world itself often feels like a standard Dungeons & Dragons world. Here be present elves and dwarves and goblins with little to mark them apart from their other standard fare elves, dwarves and goblins in gaming. The concept of magic does differ, with a supposition that magic use feeds from an individual's physical being, at least within the system developed for the Betrayal at Krondor computer game, and some descriptions within the Riftwar books. It is perhaps a concept within the Tome of Midkemia rules. An aspect of Midkemian magic that I do like is well described, and its status as a single thing with multiple approaches. This leads to magicians, for example, studying in a more scientific manner and formulating their spells accordingly, and priests calling upon it as an act of faith. Users of the two methodologies generally believe that they are tapping into different sources of magical power entirely, but it is explained that this is not the case. Same power, different methods of use. Similarly, the magic of magicians is divided into lesser and greater paths. Again, this is more about approach and understanding than actuality. There is only magic, and the division of lesser and greater is artificial and symptomatic of misunderstanding. This, for me, reflects something that we see in the real world. In the same thing can be looked at by different people, who then can arrive at vastly different interpretations. Humans have developed a plethora of religious beliefs over time that illustrate exactly this: observation of natural phenomena and the human condition leading to theological interpretations of many different stripes. An overarching theme of the Riftwar cycle, not necessarily Midkemia specifically, is the magic-facilitated invasion of one planet by another. Within the cycle, this eventually leads to a form of cooperation between Calawan and Midkemia, but just the notion of it opens up all sorts of ideas. All of the myriad of settings and worlds that we are covering in this series are open through magic or technology to the influence, incursion or otherwise connection with any other. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons explores this through Spelljammer, Planescape and the existence of plane shifting and teleportation. Factions of the Forgotten Realms invading Greyhawk, travellers from the Third Imperium reaching Kryn, well, the world or the universe or the multiverse is your oyster. Our look into Shadow World already gave us a glimpse as to what a fantasy world existing within a largely science fiction milieu might look like. But with the Riftwar concept, the possibilities are thrown wide open. In many ways, Midkemia's basic features are nothing particular to write home about, but its concepts, the detail Midkemia Press put into their city books, the ubiquitous nature of magic and its myriad interpretations, and planetary-level invasions with their fantasy sequence, are the main attractions for me. I'm not sure I can recommend Midkemia as a place to dive wholesale into gaming with, in a similar way that I wouldn't recommend Pern or Donaldson's The Land. That is, the most detail about the setting as a whole is wrapped up in the novels, and a companion to those novels. Sure, Midkemia Press offers some excellent old-school products that offer gaming opportunities, but these are, as they always have been, better used for inspiration or dropped into a more game-detailed milieu. This is not to say that Midkemia is absolutely not a place to roleplay in. Of course it can be used as a game setting, but I personally feel that the necessary legwork to do this is not worth the effort. Midkemia doesn't differ enough from other available worlds, and the lack of world-level or even kingdom-level detail is just going to be frustrating. On the other hand, I would be interested in seeing how a published Midkemia setting, perhaps by Feist and Midkemia Press working together, would pan out. Maybe something that would bind World and the Tome of Midkemia rules into one volume. As a world that has a popular following within the novels and gaming products that have remained dear to me for decades, it's a shame that this hasn't happened yet. When it does come to the yet of the matter, though, I fear the appetite of the parties and authors involved is simply not there. If it was, it would have happened by now, and all we've really received are maybes in interviews, articles and websites for a very long time. I very much doubt anything further will see the light of day. But read the books, especially Magician. Consider the concepts introduced through them. Take a look at Midkemia Press's works. Jump onto GOG and give Betrayal at Krondor a go. All of these activities are relatively inexpensive and fun things to do when it comes to this particular venerable and, in its way, highly successful fantasy world.